Coogs House. All right, the Houston Cougars survive and win by 14 points. But is there cause for concern heading into the next round of the American Athletic Conference tournament? Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater came to step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you get the latest on the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. Remember, we like to get you your news first thing in the morning, so make sure you tune to us in each day first thing in the morning. We appreciate you making us your first listen. As we approach 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, we're going to be giving away something large. I guess the quicker we get there, the bigger it is. To get there, A, you gotta get subscribed so we get there, and B, you gotta be commenting and liking on videos so we know who to give stuff away to. Bert is enthusiastically wearing his jacket, cheering on his Houston Cougars from the 750 giveaway just a couple of days ago. Thanks to Bert for enthusiastically wearing the jacket. He cheers on the Cougs. Houston wins on Friday. I guess it was technically afternoon because the game started at noon, 60-46 over East Carolina Pirates in the, I guess it's quarterfinals of the American Athletic Conference tournament. Lots to get into in that, so we'll cover that in the first segment. And then in the second segment of today's bonus episode, so I don't know if you're listening to this on Friday evening or Saturday morning, we'll talk some about the Cincinnati game, because now that game is final. We've broken that down a little bit. Houston will be playing Cincinnati on Saturday at 2 o'clock Central Time. Cincinnati beat Temple by 30 points, and so that was an impressive one to kind of look at and figure out what was going on in. But before we get to that, let's talk about East Carolina. And I say it like that because it felt like for large stretches of this game, there were a lot of Houston Cougars that had kind of already put this one behind them. They weren't thinking about this one. They didn't look very prepared to play. And there's no reason to get into that first, and I don't mean to give excuses and those kind of things, but more like what it looks like may have happened is you had a long layoff between games, an exciting last game against Memphis to kind of come down from, everyone on campus telling you your stuff don't stink, all those kinds of things over the course of several days. You then drive up to Fort Worth last night. They're up late, enthusiastically cheering on the girls team, and that's awesome. Same arena, all those kinds of things, right? You then have a turnaround today where you're playing at noon, and playing at noon is just a weird thing. I could argue the same thing about playing at Memphis last week at noon, right? Like the start of the game feels weird, and that was noon Eastern time, so different, right? All that is said, Houston eventually had at least one player shake the rust off, and that is Marcus Sasser. Sasser finished with 30 of Houston's 60 points, shot 9 of 15 from the field. He was all over the box score here, 4 of 9 from 3, 8 of 8 from the free throw line, had 5 rebounds, a pair of assists, a pair of steals, a block. He was all over this basketball game, and he really did it as a traditional, we include free throws, I guess you could really call it 4 level, but 3 level scorer. He had his pound pull-ups, he hit floaters in that mid-range area. He always, like I said, 4 of 9 from 3, but he also got to the rim in transition and finished crafty stuff around the basket. He is just put on a pro basketball player type display and would not let the Cougs fall behind. Now, I speak of this as like a come from behind victory or whatever, but like the truth is Houston was in control a lot of this game. Houston wins by 14 points and holds East Carolina to 46 when they've been averaging 69.5 points per game this season. The defense, for all the flaws I want to point out about Houston's offense, the defense was on point. The stat comes from Steve. Steve Peters has been throwing me stats from the Not on ESPN stats on Twitter, and I love those things, so thank you, Steve. He pointed out that this was the 8th team this season that Houston's held to their season low, and we look at 23 individual opponents because, like, you play a couple teams in conference twice and that kind of stuff, and Houston's played, 32 games now. When you look at 23 individual opponents, that was, where'd the stat go? 34.8% of the opponents Houston's played have had their worst offensive outing against Houston. That's not a coincidence. That is tremendous defense. So while a lot of the talk around Houston's game has been focused on, like, you only scored 60 on East Carolina, East Carolina's been giving up 70, and admittedly that's not great. However, the defense was on point. Was really, really impressed personally with the growth from Terrence Arsenault on that end. Terrence, has been a typical 4-star, 5-star freshman, shows up. Offensive game appears to be there. Maybe needs to catch up to the speed of it a little bit, but defense is never the kind of thing. I mean, except for the occasional guy like Jarace, that's a one-and-done pro. Defense always takes some catching up to do. Terrence has grown so much in that area and played 14 minutes in this basketball game. Not his high for the season, but high as of late. It's been a minute since we've seen him play 14 minutes. And frankly, that's in large part because Sampson needed him on the – well, no one was making shots, Terrence included, but he needed someone on the floor that was playing well defensively. And so we went with guys like Ray G. Chaney, veteran, leader, etc., and Terrence earned his way onto the floor in that spot today. And so it was really, really cool to see. Shout out to Beaumont United. I guess they're playing another state championship game this weekend as well. So maybe he's riding the high of that. One of the reasons that Houston did look so poor at points, we have to point out, and give our hats off moment to freshman at ECU, Ezra Osser. That kid is phenomenal. And I heard two different people post-game. One's Chris Gardner, and one, I guess, was just a random Twitter person. I don't know if that was their real name, so it doesn't matter. But people talking about, he played the kind of well that implies that he might not be at East Carolina forever, right? In the world of transfer, his efforts on I keep forgetting what day it is, on Friday, was not like your typical American Athletic Conference guy that's going to play for a team that's 500 or sub 500 like East Carolina. That's not to say they can't turn that program around on a guy like him. If they want he'd stay there, and that's all fine. But the kid's from Atlanta, 6'9", 240, and in this game he had 18 points and a conference record for the American Athletic Conference tournament, 19 rebounds in 39 minutes. And frankly, he drove Houston and Kelvin Sampson nuts on the boards. Sampson aims to rebound 50% of their misses. That's a lofty goal, but a goal they hit more often than you'd realize until you start digging into the numbers. It's a really, really interesting stat to say, hey, we're extending our own possessions that many times in a basketball game. Houston missed 41 shots and had just 7 offensive rebounds because that Osser guy was just incredible grinding off the glass. And I thought it was interesting that, obviously I'm giving a lot of credit to that kid, but Sampson felt like it was something they could have done as the U of H to keep him off the glass, and was so frustrated that when asked post-game about how impactful things like points off turnovers were, steals, blocks, etc., good defensive stats, Sampson very bluntly said, yeah, we forced him into 17 turnovers, and that led to a bunch of points. We usually get a bunch of points off second chance baskets, but that was not tonight. He couldn't get off of that topic. So while there's not a whole lot of practicing going on between a noon game on Friday and a 2:00 game on Saturday, I certainly think that will be the messaging going across. They've got to hit the glass harder, harder, harder. I thought it was interesting that there seems to be two schools of thought around what was happening with Houston's offense. So while the defense, I think, played very, very well, I would like to give my own take on the offense. I think, personally, that the U of H overpassed the ball at stretches overpassed the ball in stretches and looked like really ugly offense. But that was a reaction to the ball getting stuck in the first half. So clearly they went into halftime and said, hey, guys, the ball's getting stuck. Our baskets are all being assisted. On the basketball game, Houston made just 16 field goals. And if you're doing the math there, Sasser made 9 of the 16. They made just 16 field goals, but they had 13 assists. So consistently throughout the game, their baskets were assisted baskets. However, in the second half, you had guys passing up floaters, guys passing up relatively open or shooting over a late closeout kind of jump shots to try and find somebody else, and then they'd end up with a bad shot later in the possession or a rush shot later in the possession because of the shot clock and stuff like that. And so while I guess that's okay to grind some clock out, I do think that there were stretches in the second half where they overpassed the ball in kind of a reversal pendulum swing. And I almost thought that felt worse because in the first half, while you could argue that the ball got stuck at a couple times, and that's fine. That's not inaccurate. It did feel like Houston was just missing open shots. Houston had a bunch of open shots in this game, open threes, open kickouts, and missed layups. I mean, I'm looking at the shot chart right now, and if you call a shot where your foot is on the lane line, a layup, they were 5 of 14 from inside of about 6 feet. That's uncharacteristic for Houston, especially guys like Juwan Roberts, Jarace Walker, Reggie Chaney, etc. Juwan Roberts did not make a field goal in this game, 0 for 5. Jarace Walker just 1 for 6. But I should point out, like, Roberts did have 12 boards, so he played a lot, and got a decent amount of rebounds too. But on the whole, that's not the inside scoring presence you thought Houston was going to have in this game, especially when you go back and look at like how well Roberts played in the first game against East Carolina. He had 17 and 12, really, really dominant force inside, found the little Mike and spot a lot, and he clanked a couple of those in this game. Jamal Shedd missed layups in this game, right? Like, not a great offensive performance, but they won because they didn't get good shots. They just didn't make said shots. And that happens sometimes when you've taken a few days off of playing basketball and when you're playing at noon and it's a neutral gym. It felt like a quiet gym. Weren't a whole lot of guys there from either school. I mean, I think Houston was much better represented than East Carolina. I don't mean to say like it wasn't a great crowd, but it did not feel like the kind of crowd that I'm sure will be there on Saturday and Sunday, as those are weekend games. All that is to say, there are a bunch of different avenues to go down this game. I would imagine in reaction to this game, you see Houston focus on getting the front court involved early on Saturday. Typically they do that. Another Steve Peters stat, I forget what the stat is actually at this moment, but at one spot in time, it was like they won every game that Juwan Roberts scored first, or whatever the stat was, because they were playing really well and they got him involved early. I'd imagine they may try and be intentional about that on Saturday for a number of different reasons, including how well Jarace has played against Cincinnati in the past. But before we get too far, let's talk a little bit about FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is our new sports betting partner here at Locked On, and it's the midway point in the NBA season. I guess I technically saw it's like closer to 3/4, but it's the perfect time to download FanDuel because it's America's #1 sportsbook. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 as bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained in the case of the Houston Cougars, because that's a much more fun basketball team to watch than the Houston Rockets from time to time. That's pot shots. I do like watching Jalen Green and those guys play basketball. They just don't defend the rim very well. They've got Houston favored out the gates early as a 9.5 points over Cincinnati. As I look at the two games they played previously, that kind of feels like they just split the difference in half. I feel like the reason that the second game between the two was closer felt kind of like an anomaly, and I'm going to take Houston winning by more, 10 points or more in that game, basically. Also worth pointing out that they have the over-under set at 135.5. And if I do my quick maths here, what they're kind of assuming and looking at that, it appears, is that this one, if you're taking the under, you're assuming it's like a weird neutral site kind of thing or whatever, because Houston was just a little over that in, I believe, both of the games played this year. Yeah. And so I feel like that over-under is kind of slanted because of the stadium. Houston didn't score a whole lot of points in said stadium on Friday. They didn't score a whole lot of points in that stadium against St. Mary's either. They played great defense in both games for what it's worth. So they're kind of thinking like that's the over-under there. I'm going to take the over because I think that the rebound from this game will be a big offensive output from a couple of big fellas from Houston's front court. Before we get too far, make sure you go do that. I'm telling you to go do that and place that bet at FanDuel Sportsbook, as FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a big chance at a bigger payout with same-game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Now, Houston plays Cincinnati. Cincinnati played Temple on Friday, and Cincinnati won 84-54. Now, Temple kind of had like a very precipitous fall from the moment, I guess early in the season, they were really, really good. And then when they beat Houston, it felt like, oh man, they may be bouncing back. And they've continued to fall apart since then. Temple on the season went just 16-16 and 10-8 in conference. Remember, back when they beat Houston in early-ish, I guess it might have been mid, depending on definition, January, they were like in the fight to that felt like it could help them win the conference, at least the regular season, right? And so that they've kind of fallen to almost 500 in the conference is interesting. on Cincinnati's behalf in that game. They had 3 guys score double figures. Landers Nolly, Mike Adams Woods, and a guy off the bench named the guy he played really well against Houston too, Dan Skillings Jr., I should say. All 3 guys went over 20 points. Victor Lakin led the way with 7 blocks. I didn't realize it was 7 because I didn't watch the entire thing, but 7 blocks, tremendous job defending the rim, and he played just 25 minutes. I imagine he'll play a fairly big role in the Houston matchup on Saturday. All-around dominant win and performance by Temple in this game. And what is interesting is from the dominant performance in this game, they were actually down early. 7 minutes in, they were down by 10 points. And I understand that teams come back from that all the time when it's that early. But to come back and win by 30 points means that in the final, 33 minutes of basketball, they outscored Temple by 40. Right? Like, that's the dramatic shift that happened after that. Dan Skillings makes a layup at 12-14 to cut the lead to 8. And again, they go on they win the next 30 minutes by 40 points. Big deal for them at Cincinnati. I went back and checked some stats. The reason that this isn't coming out right after that game is I did want to check out, like, what did the game against Houston the previous couple times look like. Houston obviously did win both matchups. The game in Cincinnati, I would have thought ahead of the season was going to be a little bit dicier. Houston won by 13, was up by as many as 18 in that ball game. Houston shot pretty well. I'd say like average for them on the game. 37.5% from 3, 45.5% from the field, 4-4 in the free throw line. Didn't get a whole lot of free throws in that game. Rebounded the ball pretty well at 33, but actually did get out-rebounded. Victor Lakin is a very large man. The big thing in that game was that was the first moment we'd seen Jarace Walker have a scoring output kind of game. He had the Virginia game a couple weeks prior as an assist guy, a key drop-off, kickoff, short roll kind of guy. Remember that buzz about the short roll? But this was his first big scoring output game. He had 21 points and 5 rebounds, and frankly, it felt like they didn't have an athlete that could keep up with him. And then it didn't look like in the second matchup they really had any way to adjust. Now, Cincinnati kept the second matchup close and was actually ahead for the majority of the basketball game. But at the end of the day, they had no answer for Jarace in this basketball game. And while I guess, he makes free throws on the stretch, not necessarily big-time plays, he gets those free throws because they put Cincinnati in a rough spot, and Victor Lakin is their big guy trying to be out there guarding him if he's out there in space, because everyone else who was just putting on the block and backing down and getting into his floater kind of game. They ran sets to isolate Jarace in the short corner spot where he has his left hand at the baseline. That way he had like all this right hand space. Really like simple kind of basketball that's just my dude's better than your dude. And when they put Victor Lakin out there, he went by him and caught bodies and fouls at the rim to get free throws, right? Just an overall impressive performance from Jarace in both games. The concern in this one that we don't know much about is that Jarace played less minutes than their starters in the ECU game, which is not abnormal, but he did have some of that like heated tape around his knee. It was not his best performance by any stretch. He's had games where he just doesn't play that well. He's a teenage kid. That happens. It's just one of those things where like Houston kind of had to hang their hat on him offensively in the first 2 Cincinnati games. It's really hard to beat a team 3 times. And what are they going to do if they don't have Jarace to hang that on? Do I think Juwan Roberts can have a bounce back day and have a big one? Absolutely. Can I see Marcus Sasser saying, we're not losing this tournament, boys, and just going with it? Yes, absolutely. Jamal Shed turning it back on. Yeah, all those things can happen. When I'm looking at what happened in the first 2 Cincinnati games, they did a great job of running different kinds of options and sets that got Jarace isolated in his spots. Top of the key, outside the 3-point line, or short corner about 15 feet away, where he can operate in a way that puts guys his size on an island or puts guys smaller than him in a bad spot physically, right? Now, I will say that the big thing there is that Cincinnati on the other end, if Jarace is like having a more down-to-earth kind of day, the big thing Houston's got to watch out for is Landers Nolly. Landers Nolly played really, really well in both matchups. In the first half of the first matchup, he had 12 points. Now, admittedly, in the second half of the first matchup, he had exactly no points. So, like, that was obviously, like, kind of a little bit of a shutdown job by Houston defense in the second half, and that's kind of why they got that 18-point lead in the second half. Right in the second matchup, the one in Houston, the kid went 6 of 10 from 3, shot the skin off the ball. Crazy good shooting day, and it was in your face, off screens, off the bounce, all kinds of different ways. Right, didn't really matter what Houston did. He had that kind of a shooting day against U of H, and so like theoretically, Houston's got to find a way to shut him down and find a way to score while the Cincinnati defense is forcing them in to Victor Lakin. I think they can do it because Lakin's going to try, if they can get him to cheat up on that deep drop kind of actions, they can maybe get some drop offs to moving bigs, and he's not the most fleet of foot. Houston's a lot more athletic in the front line. How we saw Landers Nolly after watching that game against Cincinnati in Houston, my bet is almost like, I feel like you kind of like have to figure out a way to just like say, okay, he's going to get 25 or 30. Maybe we just make sure the other guys don't get 20. Because Temple, to be fair, let those other guys get 20. When Houston beat Cincinnati and Landers Notley went off, they had Julius had 14 and Lakin had 15, and then Davenport had 8. Right, like they just couldn't add up to enough stuff around him. As far as the offensive stuff goes from Cincinnati, it's nothing Houston hasn't seen before. Not just because they've played them twice before. It's going to be a lot of trying to isolate from the wings and perimeters, and you'll see tee-ups and stuff from Lakin, but really Lakin wants to get the ball in putbacks. And that's his biggest offensive impact. If Houston keep him off the glass and not worry about him as they drive the rim, they should be able to score some points on offense because the defensive pressure at the perimeter is not great. They feel like they've got the giant behind them, right? On the whole, should be a great game at 2 o'clock on ESPN2. 2 o'clock Central Time, ESPN2 in Fort Worth at Dickies. If you're there, cheer them on and cheer loud. This is for a trip to the American Athletic Conference title game, and it's really important. Like I've been talking about all week long, that like winning this thing in your last year in the conference would be this ultimate, like, oh, heck yeah, kind of moment on the way out. Also, I think selfishly, I think that they got to win to have a shot to, kind of tell their own future, talk about their own path as far as being a number 1 overall seed would go. Not that it matters because none of the 1 seeds get to play anywhere close to Houston, but you want to kind of have some say in where you go, and I think winning will help that. I'm happy to talk about it at Locked On Cougs. You can find me at Painsworth512 to talk about all things Cougs on Twitter. So that's Painsworth512 on Twitter, Instagram, and all social media handles. Painsworth. We're on TikTok now too, but we're talking all things Cougs all the time. Football, spring ball's going on. Basketball obviously going on right now. We'll see if the ladies end up making it into the ladies tournament. Baseball just started up. We talk about the Rockets, the Astros, whatever Houston sports things you want to make sure you find me at Painsworth512. Hit subscribe down below to help us get to 1,000 followers and give away some more free stuff. Thank you all so much for listening to Locked On Cougs. This, I guess it could be Friday evening. It could be Saturday morning. But we appreciate your listen. We appreciate you making it your first listen of the day if it is Saturday morning. And remember, Locked On Cougs is a primary Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day, or in our case, the number 1 team in the country. Go Cougs.